I remember staying up late one night till 1 or 2 in the morning, like digging through my numbers. And in 2019, I cut the deficit in just those last 6 months in half. And then in 2020, my pre-tax profit went from being in a deficit the year before to a 32% profit rate. Welcome to A Different Practice. I'm your host, Lauren Lester, and I'm obsessed with all things business, well-being, and optimizing the practice of law for solo and small firm lawyers. I started my solo practice right out of law school, built it from the ground up, and now work 4 days a week while earning well over 6 figures. I'm here to share tangible, concrete tips and resources for ditching the legal profession's antiquated approach and building a law practice that optimizes growth and enjoyment. Think of this as grabbing coffee with your work bestie, mixed with all the stuff they didn't teach you in law school about how to run a business. Pull up a seat, grab a cup, and get ready to be encouraged and challenged. This is A Different Practice. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Different Practice. I'm so glad you're here to join us today. Took a little bit of a break in July, just enjoying the summer, but we are back at it, and I actually wanted to pick up from where we last left off in our last episode, where we talked about the power of data and how it could really propel law firms into a higher level of success, or at least allow them to focus on what was most important to the firm or to the owner, or really what their values were and how data could be used to pinpoint whether or not the firm was actually achieving or working towards those goals. So in our last episode, we talked a lot with Carrie Colby-White about data and how it was so powerful for law firms. And what I thought I would do in this episode is share the actual data that I track and that I look at fairly regularly, that I have really found over the last few years has made a huge impact on my practice, on what I focus on achieving goals that I set for myself and for the firm. And if you left the last episode thinking that you wanted to get more into data, but maybe weren't sure where to start, I hope that sharing what I look at might be helpful. May not be exactly what you need to look at your firm or what you want to look at, but hopefully having some practical, tangible examples will get you started and at least allow you to put some of that data tracking in place. So before I jump in, I just want to quickly invite you to subscribe to our monthly newsletter. It is free, it is super easy to do, and we provide a ton of practical resources each month that will help you optimize your law firm for growth and enjoyment. You can easily sign up at adifferentpractice.com/subscribe. All right, so let's talk a bit about numbers and data. So there are 3 numbers that have really changed my practice over the years and that I really continue to focus on even now. And the first one of those numbers is the average value per sale. So for me, this is every new client who signs up, what is the average value of that new client to the firm? And this number doesn't act in a vacuum, as most data points don't, but that particular number allows me to flow into basically what my goal is and the exact number of consultations I would need to achieve that goal. So let me work that backwards here for you. So I have tracked over the last probably 6 or 7 years the total number of sales per month that the firm brings in and how many clients that represents. Is it 1 client? Is it 10 clients? Is it 20 clients? And what's the total number of sales for the month? So from that information, I am able to extrapolate the average value per individual client. When I have that number, I can also look at things like how many consults did I actually have in that particular month? How many people did I talk to, go through the consultation process? And then how many from that did I get new sales from, right? So not every client that I talk to is somebody who's going to sign up, and that's for a number of different reasons. That's totally okay. But I want to know if I talked to 20 people, how many sales did that generate? Like how many new clients signed up? And if I know the number of new clients and I know the total number of sales, then that gives me my average sale per client. What's really powerful about that number is I can then take it and say, okay, for this year, I want to have X number of dollars in sales. Let's say it's 100,000. If I know that every new client who comes in is worth on average $1,000 to me, then I would know that I would need 100 new clients for the year to hit that $100,000 goal. So being able to know those numbers, and particularly that average value per sale, really allows you to work backwards, or at least allows me to work backwards to know the exact number of consultations I need to have to presumably get to that goal. And the other layers that are coming in there as well is going to be the no-show rate. So there are certainly clients who sign up for a consultation that when I call them, don't answer and then don't end up following up. So there is a no-show rate that's going to happen. I think whether you do consultations over the phone or in person, right? There are just some people who can't make it for whatever reason. And then I also want to know my conversion rate. So of the folks that I do talk to, that I do have a consultation, how many convert to a client? For me right now, my goal for my no-show rate this year was about 25%. I'm just under that. So far this year, I'm right on target. For me, that works. For your firm, a quarter might be too high. You might want a 10% no-show rate. For your firm, if you have a really high volume, it might be 30 or 40%. Like you just have to figure out what works for your firm. But for me, it's about 25%, which we're right under for the year, which is fantastic. And then my goal for my conversion rate, so for the number of folks who I talk to who end up signing up, my goal for this year based on past data was 40%. Right now, through almost the end of July, I'm at 48% on average, which is fantastic. So that means just about 1 in every 2 people that I talk to is going to sign up. Knowing those numbers, when I know my average sale per client and how much I want to sell for the year, I can basically work that backwards to say, okay, if my conversion rate is, let's say 50% for easy math, and I'll use the previous example, each client is worth $1,000. I want to sell $100,000 this year. That means that I would need to talk to 200 people, 200 potential clients, because I'm going to assume that half of them will sign up. And then those half are going to be worth about $1,000 per each sale, which will get me to my 100. You can layer in the no-show by knowing how many consultations you'll likely have to book. So if it's 25%, then you'll have to add that additional 25% buffer so that the 200 people that you actually talk to are the ones who signed up and followed through versus the ones who signed up and just kind of fell off a cliff. For me at this point, having tracked these numbers pretty closely for probably about the last 4 years, I am at a point knowing that I just have to have a certain number of consultation spots available per week to be able to hit that number of folks who sign up, to be able to talk to the right amount of people, because I know my conversion rate is about 50%. I know what my average value per client is to be able to hit my goal. And it's really at a point now where when I tracked this per month, if last month was maybe a little bit under what the monthly amount should be to kind of slowly walk my way to my goal, that I know that I can just open up my consultation availability to get a little bit more folks in the door. And if I do it by 6 consultations for the month, let's say, I know that in general, if the data pans out, that's going to track me to get my numbers. So it can be a really powerful tool. As we talked about in the last episode, when you really start to dig in and you have the history of this data, you really can make very small tweaks if you know what the right tweaks are to make to increase sales. Let's say if that's the goal, Or maybe the tweak is that you want to increase that average sale per client. And there's a number of different ways that you can do that, but actually honing in on what the lever is that you want to pull based on the data, not based on some feeling or what some other law firm is doing or some idea that you might have that doesn't actually align with your goals, is a really powerful tool. So that average sale per client for me is the first number that I continuously keep track of. I check it every month. And I want to make sure that it just kind of hovers around the goal. Right now, it's above my goal for the year. So that may mean at the end of the year, I might change it. I might keep it where it is. There's a number of different factors at play here. Nothing's going to work in a vacuum. But having it and being able to track it per month allows me to adjust very quickly throughout the year and not let months and months and months go by where then I look at it and there's really no turning the ship around at that point, at least within maybe the given calendar year. Certainly the ship can be turned around. It just may take longer. So if you have a goal for the year by December 31st, you want to hit a certain number. Without looking at it regularly and without looking at very specific data regularly, you may not have enough time to pivot to work towards that goal in that time frame. The other thing that you can do is if you track it monthly and you are well exceeding your goal. For me right now, I am 85% of the way to my target sales for the year, and we're just over halfway through the year. I have a couple of options there, right? Like that's a fantastic place to be. I feel very grateful. I feel very proud of how hard I've worked this year so far. I'm just really ecstatic that the wheels are really turning. We're kind of cooking some oil now. And so I have a decision to make, right? I can say, you know what? It's really looking like I'm going to far exceed that goal that was relatively conservative that I set at the beginning of the year. So do I want to set a new goal at this point? And the goal should be based on the data. It should not be, well, I'm just going to double what I was hoping that my sales goal should be. If the data doesn't support that, that's where you're tracking. If the data supports that you might had a 20% increase from your original goal, then great. Make the new goal for the year around that 20% mark. You don't want to use the data to kind of set you up to be disappointed. I always take the approach of being a little bit more conservative so that I know I'm working towards something that's likely pretty achievable. And if it goes over that, then that's just fantastic and certainly something to celebrate. So I could decide to adjust my goal, which is what I did for this year, and thought, okay, I'm looking pretty good. I think I'm going to increase it a little bit. I think that I can actually probably easily hit this new goal. So right now that's what I'm tracking for and am well on my way there with about 5 months left in the year. The other option is, depending on the workload that you might have, depending on life events that may be happening, other factors outside of the firm, you may just decide, you know what, I'm 85% of my way to my goal for the whole year. It's only August. I think I'm just going to take a little bit of a step back. I'm going to take my foot off the gas just a little bit because I know even if I do that, I'm still going to hit my goal for the year, but that will give me time to focus on these other things in my life that maybe are requiring a bit more attention right now. That is totally fine. There is no reason, burning desire, requirement that you blow your goal out of the water and continually to reach for more. That really will lead ultimately, I think, to burnout, because at a certain point, the more isn't going to be there or isn't going to be there without some serious sacrifices. So depending on where you are, if you're in a really good spot watching your goal every month and you get to the halfway mark or you get to the first quarter, or wherever that kind of first milestone is, and things are looking really good, think about, is there another way you could spend your time, right? Is this going to be a really intense season for your kids and their sports coming up the second half of the year? And aren't you in such a fantastic position that if you just kind of ride it out for the rest of the year, you're not only going to hit your goal, but you're going to be able to be more of a participant in your kids' lives? That's amazing. No one is going to know that in July you could have doubled the goal, right? They're just going to know that you're showing up in every aspect of your life the way that you want to, and you probably outwardly look really proud, really fulfilled, kind of really at peace. Like no one needs to know the numbers behind all of that. What's important is that you are just spending your time the way that you want to, and that at the end of the day, your business is a support to allow you to do that. So if you aren't tracking numbers like the average value per sale or the number of consultations you have in a month or what your conversion rate is or your no-show rate, that's okay. Today's a great day to start. You're not going to have probably the historical data. You may be able to go back and look through any software that you use. It probably might be a manual process, but let's say you use a CRM that doesn't have that type of reporting, or maybe you just kind of track it in Excel, or you maybe have emails, right? You could go back and look even just for the last 12 months. You don't have to go back years and years and years, but go back through the last 12 months and kind of manually put that data together. If you'd like some historical information, I think that's helpful to be able to set realistic goals going forward and kind of know where you're starting out. But even if you don't have the data, you don't have the time to pull it together, or you're just starting, so you don't have any history to base information off of, that's okay. Starting today is a fantastic day. It is the best day to start. I keep my data in Excel. It's really simple. It's grown over the years in terms of complexity, but I just have a column for each month, then a column for the number of consultations that I had, for the number of sales that resulted from those consultations. That allows me to calculate my conversion rate. I then have the total sales for the month. That then allows me to calculate the average sale per client, per new client. And then the other couple of things that I track are also, and this is more just for me internally to make sure that the time that I am spending acquiring new sales, having consultations, drafting engagement agreements, replying to folks who send in a chat through the website, asking what type of practice area I cover. I also look at the acquisition hours is what I call them. So kind of all of that time that I spend doing that kind of sales work as a larger umbrella. I track that per month, and then I look at the total sales that I had for the month, and then the total amount of time that I spent acquiring those sales. And I look at what is the sales per acquisition hour number come out to. So essentially, for every hour that I spend acquiring a new sale, what does that result in terms of the value of the sale? For me right now, on average for the year, for every hour I spend acquiring a new sale, which is the time that I have to put in from the client contacting the firm to them signing an engagement agreement and getting them kind of set up in my system, on average for this year so far, make about $2,600 per hour that I spend on sales. So that for me is just kind of a metric that I watch just to make sure that that's really lining up with the average sale I want per client. I just want to make sure that I am efficiently spending that time acquiring those clients. If that number was significantly lower, it would give me a reason to look into my sales process and see where are there inefficiencies. Is there something that I could automate? Is there a way that I could make better templates? Is there a slowdown in terms of scheduling the consultations that I can implement some technology to reduce that? For me, watching that number, it's been pretty steady for the last few years, but I just kind of continue to watch it to make sure that it's at a pace that I feel good about. Again, there's no right or wrong here. My number could be drastically different than another colleague's number, but if it works for both of our firms, that's all that matters, which just kind of gives you some data points to be able to look at and could, as Carrie talked about, indicate that there's room for improvement because there's maybe some inefficiencies happening. So then I also look at the number of no-shows that I have to make sure that that's kind of hitting my goal of that 25%. And for me too, I also look at the average lead time. And I just kind of want to keep my eye on that. That allows me to know when a client comes to my scheduling calendar for consultations, like how far out am I booked? Like what's the first available that they could get? Is it next week? Is it a month from now? Is it 2 months from now? It just kind of allows me to keep track track of that, when that number starts to creep up into several weeks out, I have to just ask myself, am I in a position where I could open up the availability and try and take more consultations in the next few weeks? Or is that just kind of what it is right now? Something that I just watch to keep my pulse on and make sure that the process for new potential clients is as good as it can be, considering all of the factors that go into it. So the second number that really changed my practice was my burn through rate. And this is a term, I'm not sure a better word to use. There probably is some other phrase. I take that from my previous life in the web development space, right? But the burn through rate was how much work there was to do and how quickly it needed to be done. So for me in my practice, this is for the sales that come in, how long does it take me to get through that work and essentially earn that money? So here in Colorado, our trust funds are earned upon the work being completed. I know that in some states, the funds can be earned upon receipt. If that's your practice, this may not be a number that is necessarily as important for you, but I do think it is another opportunity to look at efficiency and could be a really good data point if you are thinking about maybe bringing on help, whether that be an associate or a paralegal or a legal assistant, right? Being able to know like how quickly can you on your own get through the work that is out there. And if it's not as fast as you would like, or maybe you've heard some feedback from clients about it not being as fast, you're not able to get back to them as quickly, that could be a really good data point to say, you know what, this is too high. The burn through rate, I guess is too slow. It's not high enough. And I need to make some changes here. And it could be just implementing some technology to make you more efficient or being able to auto respond. There's a number of different ways that you can attack it, but having that number looking back at you saying, you know, this is not something that I am proud of for my firm, like that's really not the target I'm looking for, then allows you to make some changes that are very specific versus just kind of throwing spaghetti against the wall. My burn through rate, I look at what I've earned for the given month. So at the end of the month, I look at all of the funds that came in that I earned because the work was completed. And then I compare that to the amount that was sold for the month previously. So if I sold $10,000 in April, in May, how much did I earn? And this is not going to be exact because every case does not come in on the first of the month and then is neatly done by the 31st of the following month. But I can kind of get a running sense over the last 12 months or the last 24 months of what my burn through rate is. So if on average I'm able to get through, let's say, $10,000 to $15,000 worth of work every month, but I am selling 20 or 25,000, right? There's a bit of a discrepancy there. And so I have to identify, is that difference because the cases just take longer and some of the cases require the court. And so the court is going to be booked out 3 months, which is why that work doesn't kind of get done as quickly. Or is it because I do estate planning work, for example, and some of the delay is just the client not responding, right? Like they were really gung-ho about talking about their estate plan. And then when push came to shove, talking about end of life and death and those kind of big decisions, gave them a little bit of cold feet. And so they've said, you know what, I'll get back to you in a couple of weeks when I'm a little bit more ready. Watching that burn rate allows me to identify what is it that is holding me back from getting everything done, which is likely not possible, but are there opportunities for efficiency there? And you may decide that for you, it's just because you don't have the capacity. Like you're doing everything you can, things are super efficient. You just need more manpower, which is why it could be a good indicator of bringing on some additional help. In addition to what I sold for the previous month and what I earned this month, layered on top of that, because it's not one-to-one and cases kind of go on over time and it's not super clean, is I look at when I complete a matter, the average number of days that matter took to complete. So the date that they signed up until roughly the end of the month that they finished, what is the time frame there? And I can look at that across different practice areas and then across different matters within the practice area. So that also gives me a little bit more insight in terms of my burn rate if it doesn't feel fast enough, or if I'm just not clear on why it is the number that it is. I can go back and look and say, oh, you know what? Well, last month I sold a majority of divorce cases. And so I know that on average, based on my data, right, those take 4 to 6 months to complete. So it's really unrealistic to assume that because I sold most of them in April that I'm going to get done with the majority of them in May. Whereas versus if I look at, well, last month I sold a bunch of marital agreements and those are actually more on the 4 to 6 week timeline. So if I have a spike in my burn rate because I got through a lot more work, I can say, oh, that's because a lot of it was this type of case. So layering on the data allows you to, as Carrie talked about, actually analyze it in a way and not just looking at raw numbers, but really be able to interpret what's going on there. So looking at your burn rate and then looking at the lifespan of a matter, kind of the average lifespan, really through those two lenses, you'll be able to get a good sense of like just how quickly you're getting through work. Another quick check that I have, although it is far more on a macro level, so I don't put too much stock in it, but I just kind of peek over every once in a while because it's in the same vein, is the amount in my trust account. So if that amount stays pretty steady, that's going to be from a number of factors, right? It means that my sales are probably pretty steady because those flow directly into my trust account, and that my burn rate is pretty steady because the amount that comes out once it's earned is based on that. But I can see if trust dips really low, it's just an indicator, hey, I need to go look at my sales. Are my sales dipping, or is it that I'm just burning through a ton of work? And in which case, do I need to increase the consultation availability that I have, because I'm probably going to need a little bit of a bump in sales to get back to kind of that floating number that it sort of tends to hover around. Again, the trust account is all of the client's money, so it is much more on a macro level, but it just gives me a kind of a good one number to check when I'm in the bank account, and I just kind of say, oh, you know, what's in there? Oh, okay, it's right around where it usually is, not too high, not too low. It is just another kind of good gut check to see, you know, how quickly are you getting through the work that is coming in the door. So the third number that fundamentally changed my practice, probably more than anything, is my percentage of profit. And that might sound odd or strange or maybe a little bit boastful in a kind of way, but let me take you back a few years and explain a little bit more why my profit percentage completely changed my business. So I opened my practice at the very end of 2015, so I don't really count that year, but from 2016 on, for the first 3 years probably, I really ran honestly in the red in terms of my pre-tax profit. I was making some years less than I needed to for expenses and salary and all those things. And in some years I was making just enough, but when you added taxes on, it wasn't enough. So I really ran in the red. I really didn't feel like I had a good grasp of the finances of the business. I knew what was coming in, I knew what was going out, but that was kind of the level. And I happened to come across in about the middle of 2019 a book that changed everything. I remember staying up late one night till 1 or 2 in the morning, like digging through my numbers, following the process of the book. And in 2019, I cut the deficit in just those last 6 months in half, as I had kind of been running for the last several years. And then in 2020, my pre-tax profit went from being in a deficit the year before to a 32% profit rate, which was incredible. And it has been up in the positive ever since. That book and that system that changed everything for me is Profit First by Mike Michalowicz. His system is pretty straightforward. It's easy to understand. It does talk about money and finances of a business, but his philosophy is that you pay profit first. For every dollar that comes into the firm, you pay profit first, and then you distribute the rest of that dollar based on a certain percentage to other buckets. So the 4 buckets that I use from his system is profit, owner's pay, which is essentially my salary and any owner's withdrawals that I take because I don't have any other employees, taxes, and then operating expenses. So in those 4 buckets, what I first did was go through and figure out what my numbers were historically. For profit, it was 0. It was pretty easy to figure out. But I had to go back and look at, in the middle of 2019, I had about 3.5 years of data. So I went back and looked at what had I paid myself, what did I pay in taxes, and then what did I pay in expenses on average for those years. And that was difficult because it was really pulling the wool out from over my eyes. I had to look at those numbers. And in the beginning, they were not great. I wasn't proud of them. I wasn't paying myself as much as I wanted to. My expenses were a lot higher than I thought because I had never really tracked them as well as I should have been. I just was kind of paying stuff as it came up and went, of course, that's a business expense. That's justified. I should pay that. So money just kept coming out. So that first night at 2 a.m. was exciting because I had this new system that made sense and I really felt like it was going to make a difference, and then came all crashing down because I looked at the actual numbers and went, ooh, we're not in a great place. But that was the beginning, right? I had to start somewhere. I had to know what the information was. I had to know what my data was, and then I could start to make a change. His system is to assign percentages to each of those buckets. He really recommends having different bank accounts for every bucket because it is hard when you're running a business. If you have one checking account for the business, there tends to be, especially at certain times of year, a good amount of money in there. And then you don't think, oh shoot, taxes are about to be due. You think, oh, I've got all this money, I'm going to go get that new computer. And then the taxes also come due. So he really strongly in the book encourages everyone to have different bank accounts so that you could see that in the profit account is this much, and in the owner's pay is this much, in taxes is this much, and expenses is this much. For me, with my bank, that was a little more challenging to do. I would do it in a heartbeat if the bank made it easier to set up. But for me, I just do it on a spreadsheet, which if you read his book, you will know that he would wave his finger at me because that's not what he wants me to be doing. But for me, it has worked. And the reason that it has worked is I always make business decisions using my spreadsheet, not going into my bank account. So I probably couldn't tell you the total amount in the bank account, but I can pretty readily tell you off the top of my head what's in each bucket. So as long as you are really diligent about that, I think that you can make it work. But certainly I'm going to defer to Mike to follow his system because he's definitely set one up that really does work. So once you have the 4 buckets, you figure out your percentages based both on historical data and also kind of where you want to go. And for me, for a couple of years, it took some adjusting. So I had to start out lower than I wanted to when it came to things like profit or even owner's pay, quite frankly, and then had to start reducing things like expenses to be able to pull some of those percentages over into the other buckets. The system is once you have your percentages for every dollar that comes in, it gets allocated to those buckets based on the percentages. For me, my profit bucket right now is 5%. So for every dollar that comes in, right, 5 cents goes into the profit bucket. 50 cents goes into owner pay, 25 cents goes into taxes, and 20 cents goes into operating expenses. I do that twice a month on the 10th and the 25th, which he recommends, which has been really helpful to look at things a little bit more frequently. Every dollar that I earn during that time period goes in, I distribute it among the 4 buckets, and then I make payments out of the buckets based on what's in each bucket. So if I am looking to buy a new computer, I go to my operating expenses and I see what's in there. I know on average how much I need to keep the lights on per month. And so it's really important to me to have a runway so that I have 3 months or so of operating expenses that I could keep the business running even if another dollar didn't come in. I know where that floor is that I really don't want to go below. So if I look at the operating expenses bucket and there's enough money in there to buy the new computer, but also know that I've got 3 months of regular expenses covered, then I feel really good about buying that computer. Whereas if I come in and the operating expenses is low and I maybe only have a month or 6 weeks of being able to pay regular expenses, I know right now, as much as I might want it or feel like it would help me, like the business just cannot afford that expense. It's a one-off buying a computer, but I've done it with, should I get this new software? How much is it per month? And what does that change in terms of my monthly amount? In the beginning, it was a lot of cutting unnecessary expenses. And now I just feel a lot more confident making decisions, especially about expenses, using this system because I know what's in that bucket. The other part that's been hugely helpful has been putting away money for taxes. I don't think about it. Like I said, that 25% comes out of every dollar that's earned, and it just sits in the account until I pay the quarterly estimate. But I know that the money is there, so I don't come up to tax time. For me, it's every quarter because of the way my business is structured, and think, oh shoot, I need to cut the government a check for X amount of money, but I do not have that in my bank account, right? Like that's going to wipe me out. Like I don't have the revenue because I've spent it on other things. Like I have not had that problem for the last 5 years or so, 4 years or so. The money's there. It doesn't mean that I like cutting that check. I mean, it's the worst 4 days of the year is having to send the government what feels like a boatload of money. But the brilliance of it is come tax time in April, I typically don't owe the government anything. And the last couple of years, the government's actually had to pay me back. So I've had to adjust my numbers because they've been too high. But I know that the money is in there and I'm not going to get that big hit or not be able to pay my tax bill. So putting that money aside for taxes. And again, your percentage is going to be based on your personal finances, how your business is structured, right? I used the help of my accountant to figure out what that number should be so that I knew I was in the ballpark. Just knowing what yours is really, really helpful. And then the other thing I do every quarter, which helps balance out the cringe that I have to hit the button to send the government so much money, is what he says, and why his book is called Profit First, is I pay profit distributions to myself every quarter out of that 5% that gets saved from every dollar for profits. I don't do the full 5%, I only do half, so that something is always in there, but that also to me means that my business is healthy, that there is a profit bucket that keeps getting built up month after month, so that if one day, if I ever wanted to expand the business, there's a chunk of money there that I could invest in something. So whether that's new technology, employees, pivoting to a different practice area, whatever it is, I have the profit built in to have a healthy business, right? It is not a business that kind of lives revenue check to revenue check, right? It's not every dollar in goes out. There's that profit that is built in. And so the profit distributions every quarter are really fun. So they're a good anecdote to paying the government. And I take out half. So whatever's in that profit bucket, I divide it in two and I take out half and I pay the half to myself. And one of the things I love in Mike's book that he says you really should use the profit money for is the fun benefit that you have, the celebration that you should give yourself for taking the risk of being an entrepreneur and running this business. The money that I get in terms of my salary is not that money, right? I use that to pay my bills and buy groceries and do all of the normal stuff that I would do if I got a salary working for someone else. So that money is the same, but I look at profit as, I took a risk, as all of us did, opening up our own business and our own law firm. And so the extra bonus, quote unquote, that you get for that is those profit distributions. So I really try hard to use them on just something fun, like something that I have been wanting for some time that's maybe a little bit more of a, extravagant purchase or, doesn't work necessarily in the budget of my day-to-day finances and my personal life. Just something that I've been wanting. A couple of years ago when I hit my crazy big revenue goal that I thought was just not attainable and threw it out there and said, let's see what would happen, and then crushed it. By Q3, I took some of the profit distributions and bought myself just a really nice ring that I had been eyeing, and was a ring that I would never buy normally based on the price of it. But I was like, you know what? The profit distributions cover it, and I want to get it. And every time I look down, I want to think about how I crushed this crazy goal that I set for myself, but more importantly, that I did it from my own business that I've built from the ground up. So, things like that. You've wanted a hot tub in the backyard, or you wanted to, go on some vacation, or you're planning on going vacation and now you can upgrade to first class, or buy the super nice hotel when you were just kind of doing the middle of the road hotel, whatever it is. Using that profit distribution each quarter has just been the fun part of being a business owner. So I love that is baked in, not only for the health of the business, but also to kind of reward us as the owners and risk takers, which I would never categorize myself as, but think that we all are. So the Profit First System, again, by Mike Michalowicz. You can buy the book on Amazon. For me, I read a lot. There's a lot of books that I've taken something from, but if I had to boil down one of the one or two books that fundamentally changed my business for the better, gave me such a better grasp on the finances of the business, really catapulted into highly profitable, really sustainable without burning myself out, with still making sure that my well-being was a top priority. Profit First by Mike Michalowicz is it. So I highly recommend it, but definitely gave you kind of the synopsis here just so you could get a sense of the process and his approach to things. But I do track those numbers twice a month. I'm on the 10th and the 25th and go through the revenue that's come in. I disperse them. I pay any expenses that have come up, making sure that they are going to work within that particular bucket. And then each quarter paying taxes and doing those profit distributions has really just made me feel a lot better about the finances of the business. One bonus number that I will share that I used for a really long time and wanted to share just because if you're starting out, or particularly if you are getting into the space of value-based pricing, so moving away from the billable hour, which doesn't serve anybody, and moving more towards selling the value that you're providing, not the time that you are spending. One question and one piece of data that I tracked for a long time that really gave me insight and also confidence eventually in my pricing was asking on a survey that I sent out to every client at the end of their matter how the value of the service that they received compared to the price that they paid. And it was just a really simple question. It had three options for the answer kind of on a scale. And it said it was too expensive, it was right on, and it was a steal. And for the first couple of years, I would probably say 60 to 70% of the responses were it was a steal. And so for me, when I didn't have the pricing toolkit, I was kind of figuring out the process in real time on how to price based on value versus time. That was such a huge piece of data for me to know that my clients thought that I was too cheap. They thought that they got a lot more for the bang for their buck. And that really they weren't looking for it to be cheap, right? They wanted to pay for the value that they received. And they were kind of telling me, now having actually received the value, which they wouldn't have known in the beginning, that the price was just not on par, right? It was too low. And so when I was really struggling with how to price, that information was so valuable to give me the confidence to say, you know what, I really do think that I need to increase my pricing. The fruits of that, along with Jess, have been the pricing toolkit, which you can get for free at thepricingtoolkit.com. So our system has been put in place over a lot of trial and error in my own practice, and then also in the practices that Jess has helped build when she was with the JEP. But that one piece of data was just really helpful in terms of where the client was at. Because at the end of the day, right, they're the ones making the decision on, is the value aligned with the price? And we try very hard in our marketing and in our sales process on sharing with them what that value is from the beginning, but they have to understand it to then be able to compare the cost. And so if you're kind of struggling with that, or maybe newer to the practice in general or newer to a practice area, that is one piece of data that like I said, I used for a long time. And at this point, just feel pretty confident about my pricing. So I've fallen away from using it. But if it is something that you think would be helpful, it's a great question to ask. And just a really simple survey. And as you start to get data that hopefully moves more towards it was right on, you'll know from the market research that your pricing is in a good point. So just a little bonus number. We talked about a ton today. Some of these numbers may work for your firm wonderfully. Some of them may not quite be what you're looking for or not be the information that you particularly need for your practice. But I hope that by sharing them and giving you some insight into the actual numbers that I track and what I look at, you can get some inspiration to start tracking that same data for yourself and for your firm and really be able to start making strategic business decisions based on data versus listening to outside noise or what everybody down the street is doing or what the latest guru on whatever social media channel is saying you should do. All of that can be really tempting to look at because they're salespeople and they sell it really well. But at the end of the day, it's your business and your numbers, and you really want to make smart decisions using that data. So thank you so much for listening. If this episode was valuable to you, it would be amazing to us if you did one or all of the following. Share it with someone you think could benefit from listening, who maybe needs some insight into data in their own firm. Rate the show on wherever you listen to your podcast, and certainly follow us so that you never miss an episode. As always, I appreciate your time. You're doing amazing work. Until next time, keep building. I'm over here giving you a virtual high five because you just finished another episode of A Different Practice. For more from this episode, head over to adifferentpractice.com/podcast for show notes and links to resources. If you found this episode helpful, let me know by leaving a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you're looking for even more practical tools to optimize your law practice for growth and enjoyment, be sure to sign up for our monthly newsletter. The link is waiting for you at adifferentpractice.com/subscribe. I can't wait for you to tune in next time. Until then, keep building a different practice.